We can stand for the reading of God's word. We want to look at verse 1 through verse 5. As soon as Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had captured Ai and had devoted to its destruction, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, he feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were warriors. So Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, sent Hoham, king of Hebron, to Param, king of Jarmuth, to Japhia, king of Lachish, and to Deber, king of Eglon, saying, Come up to me and help me, and let us strike Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the people of Israel. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered their forces and went up with all their armies and encamped against Gibeon and made war against it. You may be seated. I want to preach to you on the subject of the sovereign, the synchronized setup. The sovereign, synchronized setup. In 1656, a Dutch scientist and inventor named Christian Huygens became notably famous for his invention of the pendulum clock. The pendulum clock was the clock in the big wooden case that had the long iron arm that swung from side to side, and every hour on the hour it would strike a loud bell at least 3 times. I believe we call these the grandfather clocks. It was from this invention that 3 centuries later, a guy by the name of W.H. Short would fashion a more modern sophistication of the pendulum clock. Now, what was interesting about this upgrade is that now the pendulum clock had the capabilities of controlling a slave clock. Whatever time was on the master clock, the same time was indicative on the slave clock. But because the slave clock had its own internal hardwiring, it would sometimes become inaccurate, projecting a different time than what was on the master clock. But the slave clock was still connected to the master clock by 3 main wires. And whenever the slave clock became inaccurate, there was a power surge that ran from the 3rd wire, thus synchronizing the slave clock to the master clock. In order for the slave clock to function correctly in its purpose, it had to be in constant synchronization with the master clock. Likewise, you and I have been internally hardwired to desire to do what we want to do and how we want to do it and when we want to do it. But just like the master clock, I believe that God is constantly, sovereignly synchronizing your life, setting you up for success so that the purposes of God may come to pass in the earth. This is articulated all throughout the scriptures. The Apostle Paul tells us in the book of Philippians chapter 2 that it is God that works in you to will and to act according to his good pleasure. King David tells us in Psalms 139 that all the days of your life were already ordained and synced up before one of them came to be. But perhaps the most widely recognized articulation of God's sovereignty is when Paul writes within the doctrine of Christianity, known as the Epistle to the Romans. He writes these words out of his personal experiences and revelation. He says, and we know that all things are being synchronized together for the good of them that love the Lord and have been called according to his purpose. What most Christians already know is that God is a sovereign God. Now, this is good news. As a matter of fact, this is great news. The God that you and I serve is omnipotent and omniscient, and that regardless of what we go through, he always has your best interest at heart. But once you begin to read, comprehend, understand, and analyze the promises of God, then the sovereignty of God, whether you want to admit it or not, becomes a little frustrating. And the reason why the sovereignty of God becomes a little frustrating is because oftentimes the sovereignty of God will put you in a position that seems to contradict the promises of God. God, you said that I was more than a conqueror. God, why can't I seem to catch a break in this life? God, you said you would give me the power to create wealth. Lord, I am still struggling financially. God, you said what the righteous desire shall be granted. God, why can't I find a spouse yet? Why is the college I've been trying to get into rejecting me? The sovereignty of God will place you in an uncomfortable position. It totally contradicts the promises of God. Your rationality is, Lord, why did you allow me to get set back? But what you have to begin to understand is that your setback is a setup for a breakthrough. Your setback is just God sovereignly synchronizing your life, setting you up for success so that the purposes of God can come to pass in the earth. What you have to understand is that when God is sovereignly synchronizing your life to the place of success, he will oftentimes start by giving you a setback. A setback is uncomfortable. A setback is unwanted. But I believe God allows us these setbacks, number one, so that we may begin to learn perseverance. Here in the text in Joshua chapter 10, Adonai-Zedek, the king of Jerusalem, understood that Joshua had just made a peace treaty with the land of Gibeon. He understood that Joshua was now getting ready to walk into the royal city. A royal city is a desired place. It is a place that people desire to be at. A royal city has abundant wealth. A royal city has abundant prosperity. A royal city has abundant peace. The king of Jerusalem at that time understood that Joshua was just getting ready to step foot in there. And so now he has a 5-king coalition coming against Joshua and the Israelites. My question is, what do you do just when you're getting ready to walk into the desired places of life, only to be confronted by an uncompromising enemy? Just when things seem to be going your way, all of a sudden you get a bad report at the doctor's office. Just when things seem to be going good for you, all of a sudden an uncompromising enemy stands before you. But what I want you to understand is that this is nothing more than just perseverance. Hear me closely. Perseverance is the hand of God that realigns you into your destiny only after life's experiences have given you the tools to utilize within your destiny. This is why the testing of your faith is so uncomfortable. Many times when we're in an uncomfortable position in life, we're asking God, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? God seemingly does not answer, but what he will allow for you to happen is for you to get a mediocre job, a job that you know that you really don't want, but you're more qualified to do something else. God, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? Seemingly God does not answer, but what he will give you is a rejection letter in the mailbox. So now you are going to have to find a way to learn how to create things. God, what am I supposed to be doing in my life? Seemingly God does not answer, but what he will allow is for people to begin pulling and tugging on you in every area, that you may learn to be a cheerful giver, that you may have a bountiful harvest. And at just the right time, when God begins to align you in your destiny, God says, okay, now once you get there, I had to give you 3 things. Number 1, I had to give you maturity. Number 1, I had to give you completeness. And number 3, I had to make sure you did not lack anything at all. This is why the apostle St. James says that when you are going through setbacks of many kinds, go ahead and count it joy, because the testing of your faith has to develop perseverance, and the perseverance has to finish its active course, so that when you get to your place of destination, you may be mature, you may be complete and not lacking anything at all, declares the Lord of hosts. But I am also convinced that God allows these setbacks to give us power. Watch this, watch this. As he was getting ready to walk over into the royal city, the king of Jerusalem at that time said, number 1, it's a royal city. And also the Gibeonites are fantastic warriors. He understood something about these warriors. Now, if Joshua would have never been set back by the deception of the Gibeonites in the first place, all right, he would have never had the opportunity to actually have the lead over the Gibeonite army. Now, because Joshua was set back, something that was unexpected, not only is he the general of the Israelite army, but now he is the general over the Gibeonite army. Now he has the power to confront the uncompromising enemy and the power to walk into the desired places. I have come to tell you that when you find yourself in an uncomfortable position, a place of a setback, God says, I have to give you some power. I have to reconnect you with people that you would have never thought possible. I am now getting ready to give you the power to propel you to the next places of life that I have ordained for your life. I'm going to say the story and I'm going to sit on down. My wife and I, during the Derby, were watching the Kentucky Derby race. Number 4, the horse number 4, everybody said you got to keep your eye out on. And the reason why was because its rider was named Calvin Burrell. They understood from the last 4 derbies, Calvin Burrell had just won the last 2 derbies. They said you got to watch out for him. As the horses got into the gate, they were ready to go. They were weighing and swaying and neighing. They got ready to go. Then all of a sudden the bell rang. The horses shot out of there. Number 4 was the first horse out, just galloping out. He looked around and realized that he had